The message came from the darkness between stars. Traveling for months through the cold emptiness of space before reaching Earth's listening posts, the signal was weak and broken, filled with static that made the alien voices sound like whispers. From a dying world, Commander Minho Kim sat in the communications center of Luna Station, watching the strange face on his screen. The creature had 3 large eyes that seemed to hold all the sadness in the universe. Her skin was pale blue, and when she spoke, her voice shook with fear. "My name is Liara," the alien said through the translator. "I speak for the Kalani Confederation. We are dying." Captain Una Park leaned forward in her chair. She had seen many distress calls during her years in the colonial fleet, but nothing like this. The alien's words painted a picture of horror that made her stomach turn. "The Vorak Empire has been hunting us for 50 years, Liara continued. "They take our people. Some become slaves in their minds. Others become food for their soldiers." Lieutenant Commander Jaeon Lee checked his datapad. The Kalani were herbivores, peaceful farmers who had never built weapons or fought wars. They lived on garden worlds, growing food and raising their children under gentle suns. Now their planets were burning. "We have tried to run," Liara said. "We have tried to hide. But they always find us. They have ships that can cross the galaxy. In days, they have weapons that can destroy our cities from orbit. We have nothing to fight them with." The transmission showed images of Kalani worlds under attack. Massive dark ships hung in the sky like storm clouds, raining fire down on defenseless cities. Kalani families ran through burning streets, carrying their children, looking for places to hide that did not exist. "We heard stories about humans," Liara said. "Traders told us about a young species that survived many wars. They said humans were strong fighters who protected the weak. We do not know if these stories are true, but we have nowhere else to turn." "Commander," Kim felt anger growing in his chest. The Kalani reminded him of his own daughter, innocent, trusting, believing the universe was a safe place. The thought of creatures like the Vorak hunting them made his hands shake. "We can offer you our farming knowledge," Liara said. "We know how to grow food on any world. We can teach you to heal sick plants and make barren soil rich. We can share our star maps and our peaceful ways. But we cannot pay you what protection is truly worth." Captain Park looked at the casualty reports scrolling across her screen. Billions of Kalani had already died. Entire worlds had been emptied, their populations taken as slaves or worse. The survivors were scattered across space, hiding in asteroid fields and abandoned stations, waiting for the Vorak to find them. "Please," Liara said, and her 3 eyes filled with tears that looked like liquid starlight. "We are not asking you to die for us. We know we have no right to ask for such a thing. But if you could give us sanctuary, if you could let us hide behind your strength, we would be grateful for whatever time you could give us." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in silence. Commander Kim stared at the dark screen, thinking about his own family back on Earth. His wife was a teacher. His daughter was learning to paint. They lived in a world where the greatest dangers were traffic accidents and bad weather. Lieutenant Commander Lee pulled up tactical reports on the Vorak Empire. Their ships were larger than anything in the human fleet. Their weapons were more advanced. Their soldiers were bred for war, trained from birth to kill and conquer. Fighting them would be like throwing stones at a hurricane. "Sir," Captain Park said quietly, "we need to contact the Colonial Council." Commander Kim nodded. This decision was too big for one man to make. But deep in his heart, he already knew what humanity's answer would be. They had fought wars against impossible odds before. They had faced extinction and survived. They had learned that sometimes the right choice was also the hardest choice. Within hours, the message was transmitted to Earth, Mars, and every human colony in known space. The Colonial Council would debate the options, weigh the risks, and count the cost of war. But Commander Kim knew his people. When children were being murdered and families were being torn apart, humans did not ask about the price of doing what was right. The Kalani had asked for sanctuary. They had offered everything they had in return for protection they knew they could not truly pay for. They had reached across the void to ask strangers for help. because they had exhausted every other hope. Soon they would learn what humanity looked like when it went to war. The call went out across human space like wildfire spreading through dry grass. From the ice mining stations of Europa to the farming colonies of New Texas. From the research outposts near distant stars to the crowded cities of Mars, every human settlement received the same message. The colony needed help, and Earth was asking for volunteers. The response shocked even the most optimistic planners. Within hours, communication networks were jammed with people trying to sign up. Farmers left their fields, miners abandoned their tunnels, and teachers closed their classrooms. Even retired grandparents demanded to be put on transport ships heading for the assembly point on the orbital shipyard above Mars. Captain Hinwoo Nam watched cargo ships being fitted with missile launchers. Workers crawled over the hull of a luxury cruise liner, welding armor plating where dance floors used to be. The massive mining ship Iron Mountain was having its ore processors removed to make room for fighter squadrons. "This is crazy," muttered engineer Doyen Park as he watched his peaceful cargo hauler being turned into a warship. 3 days ago, I was delivering medical supplies to colony worlds. Now they want me to fight aliens with weapons bigger than my entire ship. But he kept working alongside the military technicians, because the pictures from Kalani space would not leave his mind. Burning cities, crying children, families torn apart by creatures that treated thinking beings like livestock. Every human who had seen those images felt the same cold anger building in their chest. Admiral Soman Choi stood in the command center of the UCS Indomitable, watching status reports flow in from across the solar system. The military had expected maybe 300 ships to volunteer for the mission. Instead, they had over 2,000 vessels of every size and description asking to join the fleet. Admiral Captain Hyun-woo Nam approached with a data pad. "We have a problem. The merchant ship Golden Dawn is requesting permission to join the fleet. But it's a passenger liner, carries families to vacation worlds." Admiral Choi looked at the ship's profile. It was big enough to carry 5,000 people, but it had no weapons and no armor. What does the captain want to do with it? Says he can carry medical supplies and emergency food for the Kalani refugees. His entire crew volunteered to come along, including the cooks and the entertainment staff. Admiral Choi nodded slowly. This was what made humans different from other species. When faced with evil, they did not just send their soldiers, sent their entire civilization. The fleet that gathered near Jupiter was unlike anything ever seen before. Military dreadnoughts floated next to converted garbage scows. Sleek fighters flew alongside mining ships that had been turned into bombers. A luxury yacht designed for rich tourists now carried enough missiles to level a small city. Admiral Giwano commanded the heavy cruiser squadron, but half her ships were converted industrial vessels. Captain Seok Shin-yu led a wing of fighters. But most of his pilots were civilians who had learned to fly in cargo haulers and passenger shuttles. They were not professional soldiers, but they were angry humans who had decided that genocide was not acceptable. The intelligence reports painted a grim picture. The Vorak Empire had been conquering and enslaving other species for over 1,000 years. Their ships were huge, their weapons were advanced, and their soldiers were bred for war. They had never lost a major battle, never been forced to retreat, never met an enemy they could not crush. But Captain Hunwo Nam looked at the human fleet and saw something the Vorak had never encountered. These were not just warships crewed by professional soldiers. These were civilian vessels operated by people who had chosen to risk everything for strangers they had never met. The cargo ship's Steady Progress was crewed by a family of traders. The father was the captain, the mother was the engineer, and their 2 adult children handled weapons and navigation. They had never fired a shot in anger, but they had watched the Kalani distress calls and decided that some things were worth dying for. The mining vessel Deep Digger carried a crew of asteroid miners who had volunteered to convert their industrial drilling equipment into weapons. Their ship was slow and ugly, but they knew how to work together in dangerous conditions. And they were not afraid of hard work or long odds. Even the luxury liner Starlight Express had found a role. Its ballrooms had been converted into medical bays, its restaurants into supply depots, and its entertainment decks into briefing rooms. The cruise director, a cheerful woman named Mira Song, was now coordinating refugee evacuation plans. Admiral Choi looked out at the assembled fleet and felt something she had never experienced before. This was not just a military operation. This was an entire species deciding that it would not stand by while innocent people were murdered. Every ship in the fleet carried volunteers who had left their families, their jobs, and their safe lives to help strangers on the other side of the galaxy. The Vorak Empire had superior technology and centuries of experience, but they had never fought humans before. They had never faced a species that would turn merchant ships into warships, farmers into soldiers, and grandmothers into gunners. Soon they would learn what happened when humans went to war, not for conquest or glory, but for justice. The stars around the Shove Prime twisted and bent as 2,000 human ships dropped out of hyperspace all at once. The space above the beautiful blue-green world suddenly filled with vessels of every shape and size, from massive military dreadnoughts to tiny converted fishing boats. They arrived in perfect formation, spread across the star system like a protective shield. Below them, the Kalani homeworld was burning. Huge black Vorak ships hung in the atmosphere like dark clouds, their harvester beams pulling screaming civilians up from the surface. Entire cities were being emptied, their populations sorted into groups, the strong ones for slavery, the weak ones for food. Admiral Soman Choi stood on the bridge of the UCS Indomitable, watching the horror unfold on her tactical screens. Kalani families were running through burning streets, trying to reach evacuation shelters that no longer existed. Children were crying for parents who had already been taken. The sight made her jaw clench with cold fury. "Been a channel to all Vorak vessels," she ordered, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. The transmission went out on every frequency, reaching both the Vorak fleet and the terrified Kalani hiding on the planet below. Admiral Choi's voice was calm and professional, but those who knew her could hear the steel beneath her words. "This is Admiral Soman Choi of the United Colonial Fleet. You are committing genocide against a peaceful species under our protection. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The response came quickly from the largest Vorak ship. The alien commander's face appeared on the screen, a creature with 4 eyes, sharp teeth, and skin like black leather. When he spoke, his voice was filled with contempt and dark amusement. "Humans," he said, the word dripping with scorn. "We have heard of your pathetic little species. You think your toy ships can challenge the might of the Vorak Empire? We have been conquering worlds since before your ancestors crawled out of caves. Withdraw now, and we might let you live as our slaves." The Vorak commander's laughter was cut short by the sound of weapons charging. Every human ship in the fleet had powered up their guns simultaneously, creating an energy signature that lit up every sensor in the system. The message was clear. Humanity had not come to negotiate. "Wrong answer," Admiral Choi said quietly, and gave the order to attack. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Vorak expected a conventional space battle, orderly formations, predictable tactics, enemies who fought the way they had been trained. Instead, they faced something that defied all logic. Captain Dong Yunbei led his squadron of converted cargo haulers straight into the center of the Vorak formation. His ship-brave merchant had been a peaceful trader just days ago, carrying food and medicine between colonies. Now it bristled with makeshift weapons and armor, charging toward enemy vessels 10 times its size. "This is for the children," he broadcast to his squadron as they dove into the enemy formation. The Vorak ships fired their massive weapons, but the human vessels scattered like a flock of birds, too small and too fast to track effectively. Meanwhile, Commander Yunjihan's mining ships approached from another angle. Her vessel, Rock Crusher, had spent years breaking apart asteroids, its industrial equipment designed to tear through the hardest materials in space. Now those same tools were being turned against Vorak warships. "Target their engine sections," she ordered her crews. "We may not have their fancy weapons, but we know how to break things." The mining ships swarmed around a Vorak cruiser like angry wasps. Their drilling equipment chewed through armor that was supposed to be impenetrable. Their cargo grapplers grabbed onto enemy ships and refused to let go. Their ore processors, designed to separate valuable metals from rock, proved surprisingly effective at separating Vorak ships from their hulls. The Vorak commander watched in growing horror, as his fleet was torn apart by what looked like a collection of civilian vessels. The humans fought with no regard for conventional tactics or their own safety. Cargo ships rammed into his dreadnoughts. Passenger liners used their bulk as battering rams. Even tiny courier vessels dove between his ships, firing missiles and immediately jumping away before his gunners could target them. "What are they doing?" he screamed at his tactical officer. "This is not how space battles are fought." But the humans were not fighting a space battle. They were fighting a rescue mission. Every ship in the fleet had volunteers who had left their families to save strangers. Every captain had crew members who would rather die than let innocent people be murdered. They fought not like soldiers following orders, but like parents protecting their children. The luxury liner Starlight Express dove through the Vorak formation, its ballrooms and restaurants now serving as medical bays for wounded Kalani refugees. Its captain, a former cruise director named Myra Song, had never fired a weapon in her life. But she flew her ship through enemy fire to reach the evacuation zones. Her entertainment staff now serving as gunners and medics. The battle raged 4 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Vorak had superior technology and centuries of experience, but they had never fought humans before. They had never faced a species that would turn merchant ships into warships and accountants into warriors. By the end of the day, the skies above the Shea Prime were clear of Vorak ships. The human fleet had taken heavy casualties, but they had won something more important than a battle. They had shown the galaxy that genocide would not be tolerated, not while humans drew breath. The first battle had been won, but the war was far. From over Morok, ships kept arriving at the Shea Prime, wave after wave of dark vessels emerging from hyperspace like sharks drawn to blood. The human fleet had driven off the initial attack, but now they faced a siege that would test every limit of their courage and determination. Captain Houndsong stood on the bridge of the Aurora's Dream, watching another group of Vorak reinforcements drop out of hyperspace. Her merchant vessel had been converted into a makeshift warship, its cargo holds now filled with missiles instead of trade goods. Around her, the crew worked frantically to prepare for the next attack. "Captain," called out her weapons officer, a young man who had been loading cargo containers just 3 weeks ago, "the Vorak are forming up for another bombardment run. They're targeting the evacuation centers." Captain Song looked at her tactical display. The enemy ships were massive, their weapons designed to crack planets open like eggs. Below them, millions of Kalani civilians were huddled in underground shelters, waiting for rescue ships that might never come. The human fleet was outnumbered and outgunned, but they were all that stood between the Vorak and genocide. "All ships, this is Aurora's Dream," she broadcast to the fleet. "Cannot let them reach the surface, whatever it takes." That followed was desperate and bloody. Lieutenant Commander Jin Wukong's mining ship Deep Cutter dove into the enemy formation, its industrial drilling equipment chewing through the hull of a Vorak cruiser. The enemy ship fired everything it had, tearing apart the mining vessel's armor and setting its engine compartments on fire. "Hull breach on decks 3 through 7, reported his engineer, a woman who had been processing asteroid a month ago. "We're losing atmosphere fast." "Keep drilling," Kong ordered, even as explosions rocked his ship. "We don't stop until that cruiser is dead." The mining ship's drill bit tore through the Vorak vessel's reactor core, causing a chain reaction that destroyed both ships. Kong and his crew had bought the fleet precious time, but at the cost of their own lives. On the planet's surface, the fighting was even more desperate. Major Soyan Lim crouched behind the rubble of a destroyed building, her rifle nearly empty. Around her, human marines fought alongside Kalani civilians who had never held weapons before. The aliens were herbivores, peaceful farmers who had never known war, but they fought with the desperate courage of parents protecting their children. "Sergeant Rue, what's your status?" she called into her radio. "We're holding the evacuation center," came the reply from Sergeant Taeyong Rue, but barely. The Vorak are using some kind of poison gas. The Kalani can't breathe it, but it doesn't affect us. Major Lim felt a cold fury building in her chest. The Vorak were not just conquering, they were exterminating. They wanted to clear the planet of all life so they could claim it for themselves. She looked at the young Kalani fighter next to her, a farmer who had picked up a rifle to defend his family. "We hold this position," she told her troops, "no matter what. These people are counting on us." The fighting continued for days. Human casualties mounted as they threw themselves between the Vorak forces and the civilians they had sworn to protect. Ships were lost, Marines were killed, and the fleet's ammunition was running dangerously low. But they did not retreat. The turning point came on the 18th day of the siege. The Vorak, frustrated by their inability to break human resistance, decided to use their ultimate weapon, a biological agent that would kill every living thing on the planet's surface. The weapon was loaded onto a special deployment vessel. Protected by the heaviest escort the enemy could provide, pilot Minji Shin sat in the cockpit of her tiny fighter, watching the biological weapon ship approach the planet. She was 23 years old, fresh out of flight school, and she had never been in combat before volunteering for this mission. Her fighter was small and fast, but it carried only a few missiles, not nearly enough to destroy such a heavily armored target. "Command, this is Echo 7, she transmitted. "I have a visual on the bioweapon ship. It's too well protected. My missiles won't get through." "Echo 7, return to base," came the reply. "We'll find another way." But Minji Shin looked at her fuel gauge and made a different calculation. Her fighter was small, but it was moving fast and carried enough fuel to make a significant explosion. She thought about the Kalani families hiding in the evacuation centers, the children who looked up at the sky and wondered if the humans would really save them. "Negative, command," she said quietly. "I'm going in." She shut off her radio and pushed her engines to maximum power. The fighter screamed through space toward the biological weapon ship, enemy fire lighting up the darkness around her. Her craft was hit multiple times, but she kept flying, her course steady and true. The explosion when her fighter hit the bioweapon ship was visible from orbit. The chain reaction destroyed not only the weapon but also 3 escort vessels, sending a shockwave through the entire Vorak fleet. As the light faded, Minji Shin's last transmission echoed across the human fleet for the children. Her sacrifice became the battle cry that finally broke the Vorak siege. The enemy, shaken by the loss of their ultimate weapon and the fanatical courage of their opponents, began to retreat. Humans had won, but at a price that would haunt them forever. The news of the Vorak defeat at Thesha Prime traveled faster than light across the galaxy. Trade routes that had been silent for decades suddenly buzzed with activity as species that had been hiding in the shadows dared to speak again. The impossible had happened. Someone had stood up to the Vorak Empire, and one Ambassador Liara stood in the ruins of her capital city, watching human engineers work alongside Kalani builders to repair the damage. The three-eyed alien who had once begged for help now served as the official representative of her people to the new alliance that was forming around humanity's actions. "I never thought I would see our cities rebuilt," she said to Captain Yuna Park, who had volunteered to stay behind as Earth's first ambassador to the Kalani government. "We had given up hope that our children would ever play in these streets again." Captain Park nodded, watching a group of human medics teaching Kalani doctors new techniques for treating combat injuries. The cost of victory had been terrible. Nearly 500 human ships had been destroyed, and over 15,000 volunteers had died protecting a species they had never met. But their sacrifice had changed everything. The formal ceremony establishing the Terran Protection Alliance took place on the anniversary of the battle. Representatives from dozens of species attended, many of them speaking publicly for the first time in centuries. The Althari, who had been driven to the edge of extinction by slavers, sent a delegation. The Peaceful Consortium, a group of scientist species that had been hiding in remote systems, emerged from their self-imposed exile. Admiral Soman Choi stood at the podium, looking out at the assembled crowd. Behind her, the memorial wall stretched for nearly a kilometer, carved with the names of every human who had died in the defense of the Shaprime. The names were written in dozens of languages, human, Kalani, and the scripts of species that had joined the alliance in the months following the battle. "We did not come to this world seeking glory or conquest," she said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "We came because we believe that no species should live in fear of extinction. We came because we believe that children should grow up in safety, regardless of what planet they call home." In the crowd, survivors of the battle listened with tears in their eyes. Captain Dong Yunbei, whose cargo hauler had been one of the few civilian vessels to survive the fighting, held the medal he had received for his courage. Next to him stood Commander Yunji Han, whose mining ship had been rebuilt as a monument to the ingenuity of human engineering, but not everyone was celebrating. In the secure communications center beneath the memorial, intelligence officers monitored Vorak military communications. The Empire had not been destroyed, only defeated. Their fleets were regrouping in distant systems, their leaders planning revenge against the species that had humiliated them. "They're moving ships toward the Outer Rim," reported intelligence officer Ji-hoon Park. "It looks like they're planning to hit some of the smaller Alliance worlds." Admiral Choi studied the tactical displays. The Vorak had learned from their defeat. Instead of attacking heavily defended worlds, they were targeting isolated colonies and recently freed planets. It was a strategy designed to force the Alliance to spread their forces thin. "Send word to all Alliance fleets," she ordered. "Going to need more ships." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Human colonies that had sent their merchant vessels to the first battle now began constructing purpose-built warships. The colony, despite their peaceful nature, offered to convert their agricultural ships into supply vessels. Even species that had no military tradition began training their people for combat. The peaceful consortium surprised everyone by revealing that their research stations had been secretly developing new weapons technologies. Dr. Haijin Kim, human physicist working with alien scientists, stood in a laboratory that looked like something from a science fiction movie. "They've been working on this for over a century," she explained to Admiral Choi during a secured video call. "Defensive weapons designed to disable rather than destroy. They never used them because they hoped they would never need to." The new Alliance faced its first major test when the Vorak attacked the farming world of New Eden. The planet was home to mixed colonies of humans and Kalani, working together to grow food for the refugee camps scattered across Alliance space. It was exactly the kind of soft target the Vorak thought they could easily capture. They were wrong. The defense of New Eden became a legend throughout the galaxy. Human warships fought alongside Kalani supply vessels and AL-3 scout ships. The peaceful consortium's new weapons disabled Vorak vessels without destroying them, allowing their crews to be captured and interrogated. For the first time in centuries, the Vorak found themselves facing an enemy that was not only willing to fight, capable of learning and adapting. The battle lasted only 3 days. But its outcome sent a message that echoed throughout known space. The Terran Protection Alliance was not just a defensive coalition, it was a new kind of civilization. One that valued cooperation over conquest and protection over profit. Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of the galaxy, they would point to the moment when a desperate alien transmission reached Earth's listening posts. The Kalani had asked for sanctuary, offering their agricultural knowledge in exchange for protection. They knew they could not truly repay. Earth's answer had been simple and terrible. 2,000 ships filled with volunteers who believed that genocide was unacceptable. The phrase that emerged from that decision became known throughout the galaxy. They called for protection, and Earth answered with thunder. The Vorak Empire still existed, but they had learned to fear the sight of human vessels on their borders. More importantly, they had learned that the galaxy was no longer theirs to ravage as they pleased. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, other species were watching and waiting, protected by an alliance that had been forged in fire and tempered by sacrifice.